The Tampa Bay Buccaneers have already lost out on some of their offensive coordinator options. I'll tell you who's out and who to look to next. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
Your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Monday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, your host of Locked On Bucs, credentialed member of the media, covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. And I am here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways that you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, the inside scoop, and exclusive content delivered directly to your phone, plus one-on-one conversations with me via text message. You can do so by going to joinsubtext.com/lockedonbucs. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedonnfl and use code LOCKEDONNFL, all lowercase, for a first deposit match up to $100. It's a mock draft Monday coming up in a little bit, but let's start things off with the continuing search for the Buccaneers' next offensive coordinator. On Friday, it was announced that the Buccaneers had scheduled interviews with former Bills offensive coordinator Ken Dorsey, former Eagles offensive coordinator Brian Johnson, Chargers offensive coordinator Kellen Moore, and Rams quarterback coach Zach Robinson. Now, over the weekend, Robinson, Dorsey, and Moore all took jobs elsewhere. Robinson is joining Raheem Morris in Atlanta. Ken Dorsey is heading to Cleveland, where he played quarterback when he was in the NFL. And Kellen Moore is going to the Philadelphia Eagles. So that leaves Thad Lewis as the internal candidate that we all kind of expect to have a really good chance of getting this job. And then Brian Johnson from the first wave of scheduled interviews. However, the Bucs now have interviews scheduled with Texans quarterback coach Jerrod Johnson and Lions wide receiver coach Antoine Randall L., who started his coaching career with the Buccaneers as an offensive assistant under Arians in 2019. And then there's a name that started to get some buzz throughout Sunday, and turns out the Buccaneers do have an interview scheduled with him, and that is Rams passing game analyst Jake Peetz. So another coach from the McVay tree that started generating some buzz. The Buccaneers have submitted their request to interview him as the offensive coordinator. But what do we know about these guys? The answer to most people is not very much. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to talk about some of these offensive coordinators and their offensive coordinator candidates and their experience so far in their coaching careers. So let's start with Brian Johnson, who was scheduled to interview with the Bucs. That was announced on Friday, but he has been a coach since 2010 when he joined Utah as the quarterback's coach, then became their offensive coordinator in 2012. He joined Mississippi State as their quarterback's coach in 2014, joined Houston, and that's the university, not the Texans, as their offensive coordinator in 2017, moved to Florida as their quarterback's coach in 2018, was promoted to their offensive coordinator in 2020. Then in 2021, he gets the call to be the Eagles quarterbacks and wide receivers coach before being promoted to offensive coordinator in 2023. Now, in 2023, as the offensive coordinator, Brian Johnson led the Philadelphia Eagles offense to the number 8 total offense in the NFL. They were number 16 in passing offense, number 8 in rushing offense, and number 7 in scoring offense with 25.5 points per game. Scoring and offense wasn't the big problem for the Eagles in 2023. It ended up being their defense that cost them a lot of football games. And, while the offense struggled at times, like any offense will, they scored below 20 points just 5 times all season. The Bucs, by comparison, under Dave Canales, did that 7 times. So, you already have an offense that was a little more potent. Granted, they had Jalen Hurts at quarterback. That's a big difference from Baker Mayfield. But as far as their playmakers, they really didn't have, anyone who was any more electric or any better than what the Buccaneers could offer. You had A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. Well, the Bucs have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. The Bucs have Rachaad White. The Eagles were kind of rotating running backs all season long. There wasn't kind of a main guy there for the Eagles, whether that was due to injury or performance or whatever the case may be. But Brian Johnson could come in and reinvigorate the run game for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but they need to add pieces, right? The Buccaneers have to add some pieces, at least one running back, probably a guard to replace Aaron Stinney as the starter. But Brian Johnson is a really, really strong candidate for the Buccaneers if he ends up landing that job. A one and done. I think that was Sirianni unloading. I understand unloading the defense coordinator, but I think he unloaded both coordinators as a CYA move to save his own job rather than a reflection of what Brian Johnson did as the offensive coordinator. But you take a look at, he got to study under, Sirianni. He got to work with a Philadelphia Eagles coaching staff and team that made the Super Bowl last year. Has experience as a coordinator beyond just this past year. So Brian Johnson, I think, as far as the outside candidates are concerned that have been announced so far, is probably the best of the bunch. But what do we really know about some of these other guys? I'm going to dive into it coming up next here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America, and they are the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on a 2 to 6 player stat projection and watch the winnings roll in. Testing my skills on PrizePicks this football season has been the most exciting way to play DFS. And if you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. PrizePicks is really simple to play, and I can make my picks and submit my entry in less than 60 seconds. And another big reason why I love PrizePicks is the quick withdrawals and the easy gameplay, plus all the different selections that they have on players and stat types. It's what makes PrizePicks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. So go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code LockedOnNFL, all one word, all lowercase, for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listener review every single day. Every day, just make sure you are coming back tomorrow. I'm going to have more to discuss revolving around the Buccaneers offensive coordinator search and, of course, some reaction to Championship Sunday. But in the meantime, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. So go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Talking more about the Bucs public offensive coordinator candidates, and let's talk about Jerrod Johnson, the quarterback's coach from Houston. So he started as an Indianapolis Colts quality control coach from 2020 to 2021. Then he was the Minnesota Vikings assistant quarterbacks coach in 2022. Then the Houston Texans quarterbacks coach in 2023. Only 35 years old. So doesn't have a whole lot of experience, but his work with CJ Stroud this year speaks volumes. I mean, we are talking about the likely offensive rookie of the year that was a quarterback from Ohio State. So you could go so far as to say that Jerrod Johnson is indeed a miracle worker. Obviously, I'm saying that slightly tongue-in-cheek, but again, David can't stop me from Ohio State slander anymore, so I'm going to take advantage. But there's not much to go on here outside of his work with Kirk Cousins in Minnesota in 2022 and then Stroud this past year in 2023. But he's studied under guys like Kyle Shanahan, Frank Reich, DeMeco Ryans. He has been around some incredibly intelligent and incredibly talented football coaches so far in his short career. So there's no doubt in my mind he's absorbed a lot of information and he might make a really solid coordinator someday. The question to me is he ready this soon? You don't know until you take the chance, right? So you could take the chance on Jerrod Johnson and he be the next big thing as far as offensive coordinators are concerned, or you could take the chance on him and he ends up being 2022 Byron Leftwich. Like there's a wide range of outcomes if he's the guy that ends up getting the job. But again, I go back, his work with San Francisco as an intern, I didn't list it, but you know, he was involved in that organization just a year or two before he joined the Indianapolis Colts. So he got to work with those offensive coaches and in that entire coaching staff, including Kyle Shanahan. That's why DeMeco Ryans had pegged him as the quarterback's coach, because DeMeco knew him from their days in San Francisco. You take a look at what Frank Reich has been able to do with some of these offenses. I talked about him on Friday's episode as being who I thought was a good candidate to be an offensive coordinator. But this would be a big risk for the Buccaneers. But, no risk it, no biscuit, right? Bruce Arians is still in the building. This may be a guy that really just crushes his interview and has some really great original ideas that the Buccaneers want to bring in. And he may be all about working with Baker Mayfield. So, just a little bit of a background on him. And then another guy who does not have a long history of coaching, Antwaan Randle El, who is a candidate. Of course, I mentioned that he was a Buccaneers offensive assistant in 2019 and 2020 before becoming the Detroit Lions wide receivers coach from 2021 to now. He's a Super Bowl champion with the Buccaneers, worked with Bruce Arians, worked with Tom Brady, plus many of the Bucs' current offensive players. He knows Todd Bowles. He knows a lot of that coaching staff, and he has now studied and worked under Dan Campbell, who might be the best leader of men among all current head coaches. So there's a lot that Antwaan Randle El could have taken from Dan Campbell. But more than that, he also studied under Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson, who is about to become the head coach of the Washington Commanders. I would be absolutely stunned if that did not end up finalizing after the Lions run is over, whether that's as I'm recording this, which it does not look like it's going to be, or after the Super Bowl. But it looks like Ben Johnson's about to become a head coach. That could also mean that Antwaan Randle El could be in a position to be promoted with the team that he's already with, which is going to be very enticing. But he can bring some of those same ideas and those schemes with him to Tampa that would maximize the talents of a lot of guys. Of course, you have Mike Evans and you have Chris Godwin, but then you have the speed of Trey Palmer and the speed of Devin Tompkins, which the Lions utilize their speed in really creative ways with Jameson Williams and Josh Reynolds. You have Rachaad White, and you take a look at what the Lions run game does with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery and some of these other guys, Cade Otton. Sam Laporta is a huge part of the Lions offense. You could see another, really huge step for Cade Otton if Antwaan Randle El brings some of Ben Johnson's ideas to Tampa with him, should he be named the offensive coordinator. And then finally, Jake Peetz, which is a name that started garnering some traction, some attention on Sunday, like I mentioned. But buckle in. This is a very long history. He's a young guy. He's going to be 40 in April, but he has a very, very long resume. So his coaching career started at Santa Barbara City College as the special teams coordinator, safeties coach, and the strength and conditioning coordinator in 2006. 2007, he became a defensive assistant at UCLA. In 2012, he went to the Jaguars as the assistant quarterbacks coach. 2013, he was an offensive analyst for Nick Saban at Atlanta. 2014, he was the offensive quality control coach for the Washington Commanders. 2015, he was a senior offensive assistant for the Oakland Raiders before becoming their assistant quarterbacks coach in 2016, then the quarterbacks coach in 2017. In 2018, he went back to Alabama as an offensive analyst. In 2019, he was the running backs coach for the Carolina Panthers, then their quarterbacks coach in 2020. In 2021, he was LSU's offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. Then he joined the Los Angeles Rams in 2022 as a pass game specialist, which is what he was also in 2023. Deep breath. Whew, that was a lot. That's a lot of stops over the last 10 or so years. So that's my first concern. Why isn't he staying anywhere more than a year or two? And a lot of these were lateral moves, not promotions. So that to me is kind of a red flag. However, that's also a lot of experience in a very short time under and around a lot of incredible coaches. Sean McVay, Nick Saban, Ron Rivera, Jack Del Rio, Ed Orgeron. I'm not sure if Jake Peetz would be my front runner. In fact, I think if I'm power ranking these guys right now, I'm probably putting Peetz last. I would say he and Jerrod Johnson are pretty close to one another. Maybe you give Peetz the edge just because of all that experience and the coaches and the success that he has been around throughout his career. But that's so much experience under some impressive football minds. And he does have experience as an offensive coordinator, does have experience as a play caller. So that's not going to be a first time thing for him, which is not something that Jerrod Johnson has to rely on. But again, you take a look, and I realize I'm saying all of this in the shadow of Dave Canales getting hired as a first-time offensive coordinator, being with the team for 1 year, and then moving on to be a head coach. I understand all of that. But when you take a look at a guy's track record like this, where he's bouncing from assistant quarterbacks coach to offensive analyst, to offensive quality control, to senior offensive assistant, to back to offensive analyst, to running backs coach, to quarterbacks coach, to offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach, then pass game specialist. He's kind of bouncing all over the place. And outside of being with the Raiders from 2015 to 2017, he wasn't anywhere longer than 2 years. So again, that makes me question, number one, does he get bored easily and he just wants to leave and try something new? Does he feel that he's making these moves in hopes of being able to move up quicker or be promoted sooner than he would in his current state? We all kind of do that, right? We've all taken jobs seeing the path to advancement being better or quicker at one spot than maybe the spot that we're already in. Maybe that's the case. Is he a guy that kind of wears out his welcome that quickly and teams want to move on from him? He wants to move on from teams. I don't know. That just, when I was going through all of these, it really started to raise the question of why is he bouncing around so much? And for that reason and that reason alone, it just makes me a little nervous. If Jake Peetz is the guy, how long is he going to be there? How long can you rely on him to be your offensive coordinator? Yeah, the Bucs could be a one and done with any of these, but none of these other candidates have the track record of one and done with their teams, or two at the most and done, like Jake Peetz does. So again, it makes me a little bit nervous, but I could be completely wrong. Jake Peetz could end up being the guy, and the Bucks could end up with a top 5 offense in the next 3 seasons because he sticks around. I don't know. But I wanted to give all of you some background on who some of these guys are that the Bucks are looking into and interviewing. Who have they been around? Who could they potentially have learned from a little bit? I still think Thad Lewis is probably the leader in the clubhouse because he's literally in the clubhouse. After that, I would say it's Brian Johnson. And then again, Antoine Randall L to me is a really, really interesting candidate that could be really successful because of the different coaches and the different players that he's already been around in his short career, could really bring a nice spark to the Buccaneers. Something else that could bring a nice spark is whoever the Buccaneers take in the upcoming draft. We get into our first mock draft of the offseason here on a Mock Draft Monday. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucks. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off of our chest, big or small. Certain things can really start to get to you, and it's important to let that out, especially to someone who is unbiased in your life. So today I want to say how I feel about something, and you might even be thinking the same thing this week. And I've mentioned to you guys before, I was really excited about the potential future of the Buccaneers with Dave Canales and Baker Mayfield coming back to do it again a second year. But now there's a lot of questions. Who's going to be the Buccaneers offensive coordinator? Is he going to want to work with Baker Mayfield? Is Mike Evans going to come back if it's another new offensive coordinator and another new quarterback? What's going to happen to Antoine Winfield Jr.? And I mean, can we imagine a world where Mike Evans and Steven Stamkos both leave Tampa Bay in the same year? It's going to make me start twitching. But therapy can be different for everyone, and most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports teams, and it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists for any time for no additional charge, no questions asked. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. Wrapping things up here on a Monday edition of the Locked On Bucks podcast. And it is the first of many mock draft Mondays that we are going to have. So throughout this process, we're going to change things up a little bit, right? It's not always going to be the status quo. It's not always going to be the same thing. Sometimes I'm going to react to somebody else's mock draft. Sometimes I'm going to do my own mock draft. Sometimes I'm going to have my insiders submit mock drafts. Sometimes I'm going to have listeners and viewers submit mock drafts. Sometimes I'm going to do situational mock drafts where if the Bucks sign this person, and this person in free agency, here's what their draft could look like. If they lose this person or this person, this is what their draft might look like. So I am going to start this one off by reacting to a 7-round mock draft by AJ Schultz of Pro Football Network. I'm not going to break down every pick, but I am going to go through what picks he made and give my reaction. So with the 26th overall pick, the Buccaneers pick in the first round, AJ has the Bucks taking edge rusher Jared Verse from Florida State. And what AJ said was, quote, "The Buccaneers have struggled to generate pressure on opposing quarterbacks all season and need some help on that side of the ball. They could use a boost to their edge rushers if they want to keep winning the NFC South. Jared Verse is one of the best in the class, boasting a superb combination of explosiveness and power," end quote. Now, Verse finished 2023 with 23 tackles, 9 sacks, and a forced fumble. He had 18 career sacks at Florida State. I will dive into this pick in a little bit, but I'm going to go through the rest of the picks that AJ had the Buccaneers making. In the second round, pick 57, he has them taking offensive guard Dominic Pooney out of Kansas. Third round with the 89th pick, he has them taking safety Bo Braid out of Maryland. Fourth round, pick 120, quarterback Quinton Newsome out of Nebraska. Sixth round, pick 184, running back Blake Watson out of Memphis. And then the seventh round, pick 217, wide receiver Luke McCaffrey out of Rice. So, taking a look at this overall, I really, really like the first pick that AJ made for the Bucs, especially considering how much they need help at the edge rusher position, but also with the way the board fell. I would have jumped all over this pick if I was the Buccaneers. I mentioned last week that I feel like Shaq Barrett is probably a cap casualty for the Buccaneers. They're going to be able, they're going to take on some dead money, but they're going to be able to free up some cap space if they let Shaq go with a post June 1st designation. I think that's happening. You take a look at Joe Tryon-Shoyinka not really working out the way that you wanted him to. Yaya Diaby really having a fantastic and explosive rookie season. If you can bring in a guy like Jared Verse to be on the opposite side of Yaya Diaby, use Joe Tryon-Shoyinka as a rotational guy, kind of work him in, I think the Bucs pass rush will improve immensely. Then I also really liked the two picks in day two in Pooney and Braid. Both really have a strong chance of being starters in week one for whatever team drafts them. I mentioned at the top of the show talking about Brian Johnson potentially being able to be the offensive coordinator to come in and improve the run game, and that they needed to upgrade at the guard position over Aaron Stinney. I like Stinney. I think he's a great depth piece. I don't think I want him to be the full-time starter for the 2024 season. But you take a look at that being a big position of need to upgrade. I think that's a great pick. And then, of course, the selection of Braid as the safety, that's a position that they just flat out need. You don't need to upgrade it because you flat out need it. Antoine Winfield Jr. is a free agent. Ryan Neal is a free agent who's probably not coming back. You have to believe that the Bucs are going to bring back Antoine Winfield Jr. some way, somehow, but then you still have a vacant position at the other starting safety position. Braid is a guy that can come in and can start immediately for this Buccaneers team, and he's tailor-made for the Todd Bowles defense. He's versatile. He can drop in coverage. He can play man. He can play zone. He can crash the box. He can blitz. He can do it all. So you would almost have Antoine Winfield Jr. and then Antoine Winfield Jr. light, where either guy can do anything on the field at any given moment. It adds another layer to the deception that Todd Bowles can bring with his defense. Beyond that, I'm kind of meh on the rest of these picks. As you'll learn throughout this draft process, you start getting into day three, you're talking about upside, not necessarily guys that you think are going to come in and be immediate starters. Maybe they'll be starters eventually. I don't hate any of these picks, but I don't love them either. You take a look at AJ's mock of Blake Watson, the running back out of Memphis, in the 6th round. If the Bucs are going to go running back that late in the draft, they need to have signed at least 2 in free agency. You have Rachaad White. That's it. That's all you have for running back on this Buccaneers roster right now. They might bring back Chase Edmonds, but you need at least 2 more running backs on this team. So, you need serious help there. But at the same time, I'm not taking a running back over an edge rusher, over a guard, or over a safety. So, this kind of worked out along the same way that I'm thinking. And you look at how the Bucs are set up, and essentially the moral of the story here, and a point that I'm going to drive home all draft season, is that despite getting to the divisional round, and based on what I'm watching while recording, over the camera's left shoulder here, they could have wound up in the Super Bowl because the San Francisco 49ers are just absolutely selling right now. Detroit is pummeling them. This Buccaneers team, despite all of that, still has a lot of holes on it. And with the pending free agents that they have, that doesn't help matters any. They could literally go with about 6 different positions in the first round And I can explain to you why that pick makes the most sense for them in that particular moment. So, again, lots of mock drafts coming. I'm going to reach out to listeners, to insiders, to viewers to submit their own. We're going to go through a lot of these exercises. I think one of my favorites that we're going to do probably a couple of times is the situational mocks. The situational of, what if all of these guys are gone? What direction do the Bucs go in? What if these guys don't come back? What if the Bucs make a splash in free agency and sign this guy? What if Baker Mayfield leaves? What if Baker Mayfield leaves and now all of a sudden you have a question at quarterback? What do the Bucs do? We're going to get into all those kinds of scenarios and get you prepped for the draft as best as we can. As for now, though, that is going to do it for this episode. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to continue talking about the offensive coordinator situation, and we're going to talk a little bit about Championship Sunday. In the meantime, make sure you are subscribed on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Check out everything that I'm doing over at BucsNation.com, and make sure you're following on Twitter at LockedOnBucs and at JYarko_Bucs. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.